Welcome to .NET All the Things, blah, blah, blah. The title that's on the website is longer, but I didn't feel like putting that all on the slide. This is like a talk that I can usually fill up to 2 hours with, and we have 40 minutes. So we're going to roll through it. And so, you know, there's a lot of stuff that I'll try and like cover, skip over, whatever. Definitely will be around for questions after and today and tomorrow. But yeah, I want to give you just a kind of a sneak peek of the things that are up with .NET right now. How many of you are active .NET developers? All of you? Okay, great. So most of you, that means we'll be tuning into .NET Conf next week, right? Yes, everybody, Tuesday afternoon this time. I'm on the .NET team. I've worked on the .NET team for, oh my God, almost 7 years, which feels like an eternity. I've worked on a lot of the mobile stuff with MAUI, and more recently I've been working on a lot of the Aspire stuff, which you'll hear plenty about next week. But what I want to do now is give you kind of a bit of a recap of the .NET story, where we're at, not spoil too much of the fun for .NET Conf, but also not, you know, like not tell you anything exciting. So we'll see how this goes. A couple demos. This is the most important thing to know about .NET over the past 22 years that it's around. We keep building shit, all right? And we keep forgetting to reconcile it. And one of the big themes of .NET 8 and .NET 9 has been reconciling the complete absolute mess we've made with .NET. If any of you have tried to hire someone in the past 5 years and explain to them why there's something called .NET Framework and .NET Core and why none of those are actually the thing anymore, and also how to Google it, you know exactly how this feels. And so we've really been trying to, instead of, you know, reinventing things and trying to make the thing that fits everything, just make everything play really nicely together and unify it as much as possible, and keep things separate where it makes sense to keep things separate, but, you know, kind of make it so that you as a .NET developer doing a .NET backend and a JavaScript front end can hop over and write a .NET MAUI app without feeling like you're in a completely different planet, or go from MAUI to something like Blazor and not feel like you have to like relearn how everything works, right? And so that's a lot of what we've been doing in .NET over the past couple of releases. We've done a lot of work with Blazor. Blazor itself has kind of been a great example of one of those things that we just kept adding stuff and we never really reconciled it until recently. We stopped with this whole like, oh, there's Blazor server and there's Blazor client and blah, blah, blah. Like we just made it one Blazor and you can just choose based on the page or whatever it is you want, you know, how you want things to render. And so for those of you who don't know what Blazor is, it's our web UI stack. If you don't want to use JavaScript, cool, I get it. Blazor's a great option. And so it's using Razor, which is also what you might have used if you ever did MVC with .NET, Words, blah, blah, blah. But Blazor's been a kind of an ongoing growth and exciting, like new kind of .NET thing over the past 5 or 6 years. And on the client side, we have .NET MAUI, which is kind of my baby, where one of the places I came from. And MAUI is the mobile and desktop UI stack. So these are the two options you have if you want to build your UI with .NET. You have Blazor for the web, you have MAUI for mobile and desktop. If you don't want to build your UI with .NET, you don't have to. How many of you are JavaScript people or have a JavaScript front end in here? Yeah, okay. So it's very normal. You guys aren't as weird as we like to pretend you are. It's okay. And so, yeah, these are where we've been looking in terms of UI. Then we have all the backend stuff. We'll talk about it all. One of the things you'll hear a lot about next week at .NET Conf is Blazor Hybrid. And so what we had happening a lot was folks saying, hey, can you make MAUI run on the web? Or, hey, can you make Blazor run on mobile or desktop? And we started to get back into that XKCD comic where we were like, yeah, we can make everything run everywhere. And then we'll just have two things that run everywhere. And we were like, wait a second, that's not a good idea. We've done this before. And one thing we've been kind of looking at the past couple of releases is getting Blazor and MAUI, our two front-end technologies, to play nicely together, right? And so not just MAUI, but also the rest of the Windows stacks, right? .NET includes all of the Windows development frameworks, WinForms, WPF, WinUI, and UWP, although that's not really like the thing anymore. The other three are the ones you care about now. And so what we've been working on is this hybrid story. where it's still Blazor or it's still Maui. You can just plug Blazor into Maui if you want to. And you get a hybrid app. And it's not quite a PWA, right? Because it's not running on the browser, in the browser sandbox. It's a mobile app. The only difference is you're writing your UI in a different language. And so that's what Blazor Hybrid is. And this is the diagram, if that helps you understand it, great. For most people, I think that just confuses you because it is confusing. But really what we're doing here is you're taking a Maui app, and instead of writing Maui UI in XAML or C#, you're writing it in Razor with Blazor syntax. And it's just rendering it using the web view as basically like a drawing canvas, right? So the way that Maui works under the hood, Maui will always use the native controls if it exists. So when you do an Maui activity indicator, right, on Android, you'll get the spinny wheel thing that's like a solid color and it kind of has a gradient and it's fancy. On iOS, you'll get the grayish, sad, boring one that has like a bunch of little dots that like go around in a line. Maui's going to do that by default. Awesome if you want things to look and feel like they're on the platform. What Blazor Hybrid gives you is the browser as the rendering engine, the web view, right? And so it's still the native web view. It's still Safari on iOS and Chrome on Android, but it's going to look the exact same because it's going to look just like how a website would render. And so if I had all the time in the world, I would talk about this with more slides, but I'm not going to even try. I'm just going to show it to you. I think that will make more sense. And I'm going to show it to you first by actually sharing my screen again. Hold on. Mirror for built-in display. Nice. And second, by showing you an app that my colleague Beth has been building, which is her countdown app, because she wanted a timer until she retires. And now we all use it as kind of our canonical sample app, which is very funny. And so this is VS Code. This is a Mac. My PC does not cooperate anymore. It has decided to throw up its arms and say, no, I am done demoing things. And so I know this is probably unfamiliar for those of you in the VS world primarily. I'll try and explain things as I go. If I don't, feel free to ask me questions after. I'm not going to even try to restart this right now. That's a recipe for disaster. But I am using the C# DevKit extension. And what that is a way for basically Visual Studio Code to understand a project file. It also has some cool things with building and running. I've always been a command line person just by default. So I use the command line a lot. But if you're a right-click person, because you're a Visual Studio developer and that's comfortable to you, that stuff also all works. This is also VS Code Pets. I feel like I have to show this every time I'm here because people always ask about it. You can add little pets to your VS Code. Yes, thank you. And then you can throw a ball and they chase after it. And so this is what I do now when all of my builds are loading. I just throw a ball to my various VS Code pets. Okay. So let's look at this app. So this is a Maui app. And the way that a Maui app is laid out is we have the project file, just like regular .NET. We have the program file, and we have our UI, our app, our resources, and everything. So if we look in this project file first, there's a bunch of stuff happening. This is still on .NET 8. Don't get mad at me. I should be using .NET 9 preview. It's okay. But in Maui, this is where I can actually set all of that like application detail stuff. Oh, that is wicked small. Hold on. No, not that one. Let's do this. Let's Command Shift P. If you are not a VS Code person, how do I zoom in the font? If you are not a VS Code person, Command Shift P is the thing to zoom in. To open that thing up top, and then you can just type things, which is what I love to do. And I just type things like zoom, and hopefully it helps. Where's my font size? Will this work? No. Okay, I know what I will do instead. I will Command Shift P theme, and I will put it on light theme, which should at least help a little bit. And then, can everyone see that okay? Yeah? Okay. So I have something like my application title, which is just time until. And then I have a bunch of things down here for my resources. And so one cool thing about Maui For the web developers in the room, this is like not magical at all. You're like, yeah, I put my files in a folder and then they work. That's awesome. For the mobile developers in the room, this is like actual witchcraft. So if you are not a mobile developer, you just have to promise me. But like you know, it's cool. We have things like all of our images are just getting loaded in through the project file, and that's how we're actually bundling them into that mobile app. And so we just stick them in this folder here. My app icon is just right now being composed with this one line. So the thing that actually shows up on my home screen, my splash screen is just a resource and a background color and a base size. And all of those things I have in my resources over here. My app icon, my splash screen, all those things. And those just get bundled in and built correctly with the app. Same thing with just like my regular images. One thing that if you are a mobile developer, you know, especially with Android, is they give you a bunch of folders with like nonsense names, and they make you put a folder, an image of a different resolution in every single one of those folders to like, you know, account for all of the different screen resolutions and device sizes. And it's a whole disaster. So as long as you give MAUI a PNG or an SVG, we just do the sizing for you. It makes your life a lot easier, very exciting. There's a bunch of other MAUI-esque stuff in here. Like the program is just a builder pattern. So like the rest of .NET, nothing too crazy. What we are doing in the builder here is something called Add Blazor Web View. Add MAUI Blazor Web View, and that allows us to actually instantiate the web view from inside the MAUI app. And then we also do something called Add the Web Developer Tools, which we'll look at in a little bit, what that does. And then in my MAUI main page, the only thing I have in here, XAML. Well, I'm not a XAML fan. I'm very bad at it, which is funny because I worked on the team that like, you know, XAML is our UI for 5 or 6 years. So this is my favorite. It's just one thing, and it's just the Blazor Web View, and there is a root. And in that root folder, in here, we just have an index, and there's nothing in here, right? Because this is not actually where my Blazor Hybrid UI is. Beth is smart enough to have put this in a separate project altogether. If we go back to the builder, to the main page, I'm actually pulling this in from the root namespace, which is coming in from the root project, which is up here. And so what's cool about this sample app, and this is on GitHub, it's just called Beth Time Until. Beth is also using it in a regular old Blazor app and a WPF app, which obviously I can't show you because I'm on a Mac, but it is shared, this one Blazor UI. And so if I wanted to, I could go ahead and run the web version of this or the WPF version of this, but we're not going to do that. We're going to look at MAUI. But this is nothing too crazy. This is a pretty standard Blazor app. Let's run it so we can actually look at what's going on here. And so, .NET 9 sneak peek. To run MAUI from the command line right now, you have to do .NET build-T because .NET run doesn't understand multi-targeted projects. We just fixed that. That is in the latest .NET build. So you can actually, at some point soon, .NET run a MAUI app, which is huge. And this is the app. So what you can tell is this is a Mac desktop app, right? If I was to do function, I think F12 is developer tools. I can't remember. F11? Not F11. Let me do it this way. Oh, sneak peek. Don't look. Tools. Developer tools. Oh, sorry. That's the worst hotkey ever. What is that? Option Command I? Okay, hold on. Option Command I. No. Pipe? No? All right, whatever. The browser tools work here. I just don't know how to open them, apparently. So that's fine. What you also can see going on here is that it actually is telling me what device it's running on. And that's just using plain old .NET. Nothing too crazy happening here. What Beth is doing in this root project here is on the page, or in the index page, she's injecting this form factor thing. And the form factor is going to call, sorry, I know I'm scrolling all over the place. I usually take my time better at this, but too much going on. The form factor thing is calling from the actual MAUI app and from the web or the WPF app in that case. A service that's here that's literally just saying return device info to string. And so that's a MAUI API, the device info thing. And it's just very simply in this MAUI app saying get form factor in the Blazor shared code, actually accessing it right here. That's it. It's all interop magic, blah, blah, blah. Nothing too crazy. Another thing that is cool about this is if you go into configure and you click the calendar control. This is the Safari calendar control. If you go into a calendar app on Mac, this is not the calendar that pops up. And so for me, that's kind of my giveaway that this is a Blazor hybrid app and not a MAUI native app, right? Because if this was a native MAUI app, it would be using the native calendar control. It's not. It's using the browser one. But that's just another cool little tidbit about this. That's in the configure page here. And there's a whole bunch of Blazor stuff. I'm also not a Blazor developer. Front end is just not my jam. And in this case, Beth is actually using compiler directives to only do things on Android, iOS, and Windows in terms of taking an image. On Mac, she didn't want to deal with the image permission stuff, so she just said it's not possible. And it's very simple. And so this is super flexible. The cool thing about Blazor Hybrid is you can do something like what Beth is doing here with the full app, just literally the only MAUI in it being turning it on. You can also use bits and pieces of Blazor. So if you have one singular Blazor control somewhere, you can stick that into the MAUI app. You have a question?
Just to understand, so it's like two processes running, the browser and the MAUI host.
Good question. No, it's just one, because MAUI's running the .NET that Blazor needs to run. And so the browser isn't actually running. It's very confusing. Every time we try to explain it, we still confuse people. But the browser itself isn't running. The browser is basically serving as like a drawing canvas for the UI to get drawn. Yeah, it's just a control. So that means no browser sandbox. That also means things like you can, access device APIs that you wouldn't be able to access from the browser. Permission things you can set when you open the app. It can say like, hey, can this access your camera? Sure it can. One thing we're going to talk a lot about next week that is kind of an extension of this story is just general .NET MAUI hybrid apps. So for those of you using JavaScript, we basically took the same pattern we had with the Blazor hybrid stuff and the Blazor web view, and we created it the general hybrid web view for JavaScript. And so if you have Angular or React or whatever it is, or Vue and Vite, JavaScript flavor of the week, those things can now go into your MAUI app. And so, like I said, like there will be a bunch about this next week, so I don't really need to jump into it too much. But yeah, very flexible if you are somewhere on the web and want to get to mobile and desktop soon. We're going to fly through this stuff because these are the last times we get to show these numbers. Every year, we update all of our numbers at .NETConf, and then we use the same slides all year. So it feels very silly at this point to be talking about things that were number one in 2023 because it is like the end of the year. But you're like probably some of the last people to see these before we update them next week, which is exciting. .NET's growing. .NET's fast. That's kind of the big thing. If you haven't seen the annual performance improvements in .NET blog post by Stephen Taub, they are unbelievable. This one was 324 pages, and it was not the longest by a landslide. I think last year's was like 380 or something, just whack. And so there's a lot of this, like every .NET release, we're always just the fundamentals are the number one thing. Performance, stability, all those things. But also trying to keep it modern and up to date with kind of what the rest of the world is doing in terms of development. Making sure the fundamentals are good, but also making sure that our AI stuff is up to date. And I am not an AI person. I am a skeptic. I only talk about AI because I feel like I probably will get fired if I don't. Like, I think it's in my contract somewhere. But we have been doing a lot in that space to kind of, keep ourselves up to date. On the web as well. So with Blazor, with the UI, but also just in terms of security. Security is like the huge hot button issue right now. Runtime stuff. Ahead of time compilation is a big hit right now for .NET 9. So you'll hear about that a lot next week. You know, just various things there. And then, of course, modern language features. So, you know, one thing we've heard a lot about .NET, besides that nobody knows how to Google it because we have 50 names for it, is that C# can feel clunky to people who are coming out of college now. When I was in college, people told me Python was dying and nobody would ever use it anymore. And now I do not know someone who's come out of college with a CS degree that doesn't know Python. And so these things kind of change at the whims of the universe. But C# itself has been doing a ton of work to kind of stay cleaner, more modern, more approachable for people who don't come from this like object-oriented world. And so something like this to .NET developers, minimal APIs, like this looks like absolute magic. This is like pseudocode, right? To a JavaScript developer, you're like, yes, that is code. Why is that exciting? Cool, very nice. But when you see, I don't know how much of this is reflected in the real world with you folks when you hire people, but a lot of times when you bring in new developers who have been doing .NET and C#, like this is the kind of stuff they want to write, and this is what their apps look like. And then they can slowly grow out of this into like enterprise architecture patterns and whatever you want to call it with MVC and controllers and blah, blah, blah. But just making it not terrifying to get started has been a huge theme of .NET over the past couple releases, and C# for a while now. And of course, everything's cross-platform, right? Like Windows is always going to be kind of the premier .NET development experience with Visual Studio, but more and more you see us invest in VS Code and the command line, Linux support, both to build on and also run .NET on. And so that has enabled a lot of things in the cloud, code spaces, yada, yada. Yeah. So that's really where .NET is right now. We're trying to be fun and flexible and cool. AI is obviously the next big thing in terms of investment for us, like feature place. There is a huge announcement next week. That is like one of the actually cool things we're talking about, that besides like, look, we made it faster again. AI and Aspire are, I think, the themes of .NET 9 this year. But yeah, Azure OpenAI, Cognitive SDKs, the Azure stuff has been great. Semantic kernel, there's a new package coming out. I don't want to spoil it, but for me, the only way I've been able to care about AI at all is by helping the people who have come to me and said, my boss told me I need to put AI in this app and I don't know how. Yeah, and I know that happens to people, which is crazy. But making it easier to develop AI into your application, I have been able to actually stomach AI as like a thing I have to care about. And so that's a lot of what we've been doing in .NET, which, yeah, I could keep talking about it and then I'm going to spoil something and then that's bad. The other thing we've been really working on for .NET 9 is just making it easier for you to build good apps, right? By default. Apps that are production ready or modern or whatever word you want to use, whatever adjective it is. But really, we've been boiling it down to apps needing things like observability, resiliency, scalability, and manageability. And those are all just buzzwords, but what they really mean is like, hey, when it's Black Friday in the US and everyone decides they're going to shop on the same day, my website doesn't fall apart. Or, you know, if suddenly my website starts getting DDoSed, like I can actually see what's going on. I can crack open things and manage things when I don't actually have access to a server room anymore. I can't just take a USB stick and go plug it into a box somewhere on-prem and fix things. You know, there's some Azure cloud somewhere in whatever the Europe data centers are, and I can't like just go there to fix things. And so a lot of what we've been doing at .NET is building these things in the box to make your life hopefully easier. The problem is, usually on the .NET team, we will show you sample apps such as this, right? App data source, very complicated. And for us on the .NET team, we built a platform. A lot of us came from jobs where we were working on .NET apps before we joined the .NET team, which is good, but the world keeps changing. And so things keep adapting. And we've had more and more people come to us and be like, well, here's the thing, like the sample app is great and all, but I am in this world now where I have an app that has like a bunch of different APIs, and one of them's into a Postgres database, and one of them is into an event bus, and I actually have a cache in there, and I have all these other APIs, and now I have AI and webhooks and functions and blah, blah, blah. And getting all of these things to play nicely together, even though it's all .NET, is still a real big mess. And in some cases, your company might have different teams for each of these components. And in some cases, you might be the person who owns all of these components, or a mix of both. And so everybody has a weird way that they have to duct tape together their development ecosystem and their like actual dev time life cycle to make things work. There's a lot of like, wizards somewhere that like someone has a script that you can run. And if you run the script with the right permissions, everything will mostly work until you have to update anything, right? And sometimes a team will push things to staging. Sometimes a team will only do local builds. It's all crazy. And as we add more things into the cloud world, you don't actually have to read any of these. This is purely just like a oh shit slide. There's more stuff. There are words like Redis and RabbitMQ that are things you're supposed to care about in app development. They aren't just like fake words that we put up there. I don't know. There's a lot. And so for me, coming from the mobile world over into, the cloud side of things, I was like, how does anybody keep up with any of this? I mean, Kubernetes alone, I think there's like a whole subreddit just dedicated to Kubernetes memes about how difficult it is and annoying it is. And then you start adding everything else. There's like 8 million flavors of SQL database. And then there's also no SQL databases. And then there's all these CI/CD things. And then there's all these container runtimes. It's very confusing. And we on the .NET team were hearing people feel this pain, and they were like, hey, this is really great that I can turn on resiliency now. However, I can't get my app to run most of the time unless I hold it at perfectly the correct angle, and I also like do a little dance. So can you guys maybe help with that? And we were like, whoa, that's a great idea. And so a couple of years ago, we started this journey for .NET Aspire. And we have still been toying with what the actual definition of Aspire is, because it's kind of a bunch of stuff. Our marketing people keep getting mad at us because they're like, you're supposed to say, like, why? You're supposed to say, Aspire makes you build better apps. And I'm like, sure, but that also kind of makes it feel like .NET doesn't make you build better apps. And so I don't want to say that. What we're rolling with right now is tools, templates, and packages for building, modern applications, which in our world is those 4 pillars of observability, resiliency, scalability, and manageability. We've tried to help alleviate a lot of the pain that we know developers feel. YAML. Every single person we've talked to complains about YAML. If you're a DevOps person and you're a YAML person, great. We love you. We will never replace you. Like, stay where you are. However, for those of us who don't have a DevOps person that knows YAML to do all of our problem solving for us, that's what this is for. And also things like OpenTelemetry, right? Like, hey, I want to use industry standard stuff. I don't want to have to roll my own telemetry thing. I want to just plug it into Grafana. Cool, .NET supports that. Okay, cool. Why would you never turn that on for me? Oh, that's a good question. So that's a lot of what Aspire does. It's just glues and turns on and sets reasonable defaults for a lot of these things that exist in the platform to kind of streamline your overall app development lifecycle, especially locally. And so let us look at that. Oh my God, I only have 10 minutes. Sorry, I'm flying. Not this one. This is not the one I want. Okay. So this is the eShop sample app. And so this is also open source. Let me just pull up the GitHub so that you can actually .NET eShop. We keep this up to date as a good example of like a big app. This is the architecture diagram I just showed you in PowerPoint, right? So like it's supposed to look and feel a bit more like an actual production enterprise application. And we keep it up to date with the latest things and try to make it use the latest features of things. And so that's what I'm going to show you with Aspire today. I just cloned this. I cloned it and then I made sure it ran. but I did just clone it this morning. I'm just on main. I'm on the latest. And usually getting something like this to build would be a complete disaster, because if I go into the source folder, you will see I have all of this stuff. And these are all actually different .NET projects. And so I have a bunch of different APIs. I have like an identity thing. I have my MAUI hybrid app and my native MAUI app. I have my actual web app, webhook stuff. With Aspire, what it gives you is these two projects. So the app host and the service defaults. So the app host is basically a glorified like app runner. That's pretty much it. But it's using C#. And so that's pretty nifty, because now instead of doing something like Docker Compose or YAML, whatever, or like some startup script, or God forbid in Visual Studio doing the thing where you try to start multiple projects at once, which is like the worst, clunkiest UI of all time. I just can do it with a bunch of variables and do builder.add. I can do cool things like reference things, right? So in this case, my basket API is going to reference my Redis cache, so it knows there's a cache it needs to pay attention to. It's also going to reference the RabbitMQ event bus, and this wait for thing, which we'll look at in a bit too. And then in things like inject environment variables, blah, blah, blah. And this is all local. And so this is pretty much just telling my app, like, hey, when you start up on my machine, on my MacBook, this is what you need to do. You can also do things, I don't think we have an example in eShop of this, but you can do things like just point to a link and just say, hey, for my identity API, this is actually the staging environment for it. Like, we don't have the code on this machine. It doesn't matter. Just go connect to it there. The other thing Aspire does is gives you a set of service defaults. And so Aspire will give you this one file when you do the file new, but you can, as you can see with eShop here, add a bunch of stuff to customize it to whatever works for you. All the extensions Service Defaults project really does is just turn on a bunch of the stuff in .NET we don't usually turn on by default, but that already exists, such as, like I said, OpenTelemetry, health checks, which are a huge thing, like just being able to tell if a service is actually healthy before I try to connect to it can really help things. And then mapping default endpoints for what we call service discoverability or service discovery, so that I don't actually have to figure out what ports everything is running on when I run this. So we're going to do a good old .NET rundown here and look at what this actually looks like. This is going to pull everything. So I have Docker running right now. I have Docker Desktop running. You don't have to have Docker. It just won't run anything that needs to be containerized, which is like everything in the cloud now. But if you just want to run your like .NET code projects, you don't need to do the Docker stuff. And so what this is doing is, instead of building all of these projects individually in myself, the app host project is building everything. And I know, it's okay. Sometimes this takes a second. Sometimes the command line is too fast. And then when you actually go to the dashboard, it's not up yet. Nice. This is my Aspire dashboard. And let me change the theme of this too. We have theming. That's how you know it's a real app. And this is just running on localhost. This is all running locally on my machine. I'm not doing anything to get all this stuff going here. And like I said, I cloned this right before the demo. I would have cloned it during it had I known for sure it was going to work, but I didn't. So I did it before because I'm a good demoer, but I have not changed anything. All I did was literally go in and just what you saw there, .NET Run project. And what it did was it spun up all of my .NET projects. It gave them a bunch of endpoints. And so this is the web app. This is, the UI part. Here we go. I can click in. I can pretend to log in. Do all that. What? For container stuff, which we'll look at, yes. For the .NET stuff, you don't. So all of this without the actual like database and everything running, you don't. You could also use something like Podman or whatever container runtime you care about. But yeah, I have stuff here. And as I click through it, you could actually trace all of the things that are happening in between all of these different parts of my app. And so you can see there's some amount of identity something happening. That's when I logged in as Alice or whatever the default account is. When I click onto things, I check to see if there are any orders in there. It's doing some database commands, and all of these things you can dive into and see details and right in this dashboard. And so this is all built into .NET already. Aspire is not doing any of this except for turning it on and showing it to you in dashboard, which is very cool. Because it's nice to know that .NET can do that. It's very annoying for me because I had no idea .NET could do any of this stuff until I started working on Aspire, and they were like, yeah, it just does all of it. And I was like, why haven't we been telling people this? That's kind of part of it. In terms of Docker, some of these things you can see are of type container. And so if I go into my Docker desktop thing here, what happens when I run the Aspire app is it actually pulls all of these images. I know it's super blurry, I'm sorry, but it will pull the correct image based on what Aspire tells it the correct image is, and you can customize all those things yourself. It's just code. And it will pull those in and start them in the background and do the same thing it did with my projects where it tells it what ports everything's running on. It does all of the default wiring and setup and blah, blah, blah. So I don't actually have to go and do all that myself. And if I click into details on these things, such as if we look at, what's a good one to look at? The basket. No, let's do ordering because I think ordering uses the cache too. I can get a bunch of details on it. So I can actually see the healthy state, which is based on the health check. So if I just go on that, click to the actual thing, delete the scalar stuff and go to health. Like this is just a regular old .NET health check. It says healthy. Whoa, magic, UI. And I can define my health check in code however I want to. So if I want to say that my health check means that it has to, perform a certain function and put that in a database somewhere, I can say that. Otherwise, just going to look to see if it's alive. But I also have a bunch of connection strings in here, and this is just being injected by Aspire to tell it how to actually talk to my RabbitMQ event bus, how to talk to my database, and where my actual identity API URL is, right? So this says identity, scroll, please. Identity URL is localhost 5243. My identity API, 5243. Aspire does all of that. It wired all that magically together. And so every time I run this now, some of those ports will change, which is okay, but Aspire is going to reconnect them all for me. One other thing I'll call out, we will dive more into the cool stuff that's coming out, that has come out with Aspire 9. So this is running the latest version of Aspire that comes out next week. One of the coolest things about it is we actually keep containers alive. We used to tear down everything every time you stopped the Aspire app. And so you would then restart it and everything would have to start again. And I am on a MacBook Pro, so it's not too painful, but it's not great. So I just killed the Aspire app down here. If I go into Docker, 2 of those containers are still running. The third one, the one that I didn't have persistent, that died. But these 2 things stayed. And so when I run this now, there's so much more I want to show. I yap too much for a 40-minute talk. This is what I've learned today. Come on. The Redis one you just saw for a second had the state starting, but these 2, which take a lot longer to start up, those were already going. And so these things now can wait until the right things are awake to start so they don't error out randomly. But yeah, lots of nifty things there to really customize it for your development. How all of that works in terms of those third-party things, and this is what I'll end on in terms of Aspire, is we use what we call Aspire integrations. And so Aspire gives you a set of kind of curated packages for popular cloud controls and resources that we wire things up by default for you. So when you pull in the Postgres Aspire integration, we do the things that we think are the right thing to turn it on by default. But since it's all in code, you can overwrite any of it. And that is where something like we get Postgres, add database, Postgres with image, with tag, with lifetime. You can go ahead and say, this is the actual type of Postgres image I want. This is the actual tag and version I want of all of that. And most integrations have a counterpart integration in the actual app. So it's something like the ordering API. If I go into my project here, this has a different Aspire integration for Postgres that's actually helping it do the service discovery on the project side and set everything up on the project side. And it's just glue. It's not rewriting Postgres or anything. We're not doing anything crazy like that. But we give you these kind of pairs of integrations to help just make development a lot easier. Deployment wise, you don't have to change anything. So if you have some magical pipeline somewhere that works, don't touch it. We do give you an easier kind of like .NET command line AZD up publish command that will get things to container apps if that's something you want. But I'm obviously not going to go into that right now. And if your deployment stuff works, Aspire is really a local concept, so it will continue to work. Don't worry. We're not breaking anything. It's not going to blow up your deployment. But that's that. There's so much to talk about with Aspire, .NET 9, MAUI, and Blazor. I'll do a deeper dive into Blazor Hybrid tomorrow for my other session. But the best thing to do for all of you will be to tune in next week on Tuesday at 8 a.m. East Pacific. So like, what's 9? Whatever. You know the time change better than I do. 8 a.m. Pacific. 3 full days of .NET content. And it will all be recorded so you can go back and watch it later. But yeah, thank you so much. I will stick around for questions for a little bit until we have to evacuate the room for whoever's next. But I appreciate you coming by and hope to catch up with you the rest of this week.